one after another, like high waves crashing onto amazingly beautiful hills covered with trees and green grass. Many of these hills are strewn with white limestone and from a distance look like flocks of sheep. These are known as the Podillyan Tovtry in the Khmelnytskyi Oblast. Each of them has their own history and secrets. In order to unravel the mystery and conquer 160 peaks of the local national park, scientists had to delve far back into the centuries. So let us now take a walk along the ancient reef ridge and we will eventually get to the village of Nihyn. The local Podillyan Tovtry crawl up to the very edge of this quaint rural village. If we were to make an imaginative leap into history 8 million years ago, we would find ourselves on the edge of the Sarmatian side reef, today known as the Nihyn Tovtry. And behind me we have a spectacular vista of an open sea, the depth of which, according to the most modest estimates of geodesy scientists, was about 40 meters. It extended all the way to the Carpathian Mountains. This was the Sarmatian era of the elevation of the Carpathian Mountains. The sea slowly retreated eastward towards the shores of the present-day Black Sea. It was once a warm Pontic sea in which various organisms intensively developed. It was precisely from these organisms that the entirety of this incredible reef was formed. One need not go far to confirm this fact. Each one of these raised stones contains a peculiar set of organic remains. I have a pebble in my hand, which contains a total of 4 fossilized shells of cardium mollusks, which are the main reef builders. In fact, it was a bank where mollusks developed massively and fish lived here as well. It was once an oasis of life under the sea. The sea itself was rich in life, but here the concentration is much greater. Here are the more interesting organisms. They are creatures covered with moss, are difficult to spot and have moss coating similar to the modern-day creature, but already fossilized. These are what are known as colonial animal organisms with interspersed plantings. They massively cover the marley remains, thus condensing them and making them more resistant to destruction. It is exactly this very combination that creates such a rocky ridge on the surrounding plains. Continuing to form, the reef simultaneously rose above the sea level, rising by 40 to 50 meters. This is a good reflection of the modern relief. Today the former seabed is merely a sea of plowed fields that once surrounded the sea ridge. Only a small tributary of the Dniester River reminds us about this prehistoric water element. Behind me is one of the most beautiful Dniester vistas of the Podilsky Tovtry National Park, a place where the Smotrich River bends around the Nihyn Tovtry. It had to turn sharply to the west in order to bypass the impassable ridge, which it stumbled upon. Now there is a huge terraced plain in the valley of the river, which is used for fields and gardens. Around here, Smotrich begins to form a canyon, which reaches its maximum depth within Khmelnytskyi. Here we see only the beginning and only the peaks of the Silurian rocks. They are approximately 327 million years old. This is the end of the late Silurian River. This place is incredibly picturesque, and the vista is none other than breathtaking. From the height of the steep, the Smotrich River looks like a small snake on such a contrasting background. However, against the backdrop of epic landscapes, everything seems much smaller, and the unattractive pebbles underfoot do not make a particularly special impression. Their value as a geological deposit of many centuries ago can only be understood in a museum, where nothing distracts a person from the subject of the study. This exposition presents the finds of geologists on the territory of the Podillyan Tovtry. Most of the collection was composed by researchers of the national park. Visitors have the opportunity to touch the past. Most of these remains can be felt, and you can even appreciate how heavy or light they are. Here are some of the ancient metazoans that existed within the territory of the park. These are the colonial organisms of the Vendian period, called Nemiana simplex. Such colonies were created around the shallow water of the Vendian Sea, and the age of these animals is 600 to 620 million years. These are the most ancient multicellular forms of life known to me. Their peculiarity is that such metazoans in similar layers can be found in Australia, in the north of Russia, and in the south of Africa. This proves that all continents at that time were a single continent, and that this particular organism was common along its shores. The central exhibit is called Khmelnytskyi trilobite. Here it is already in a prepared form, that is, visitors of the museum will have the opportunity to see how this animal looked in real life and how it survived in the event of danger. Here it is in its serene and unfolded form, but as soon as it felt danger, it completely covered itself in its armored shell. This was necessary for the organisms to escape from enemies. By curling into a ball, they buried themselves in mud, and such prey was already inaccessible to predators. And here are those that hunted them. They are called nautiloids. Here we see a fragment of the cracked shell of this sea inhabitant and see the voids in which the gas was concentrated. This allowed them to change their depth. The length of a whole nautiloid reached about 3 meters. It was a predator of the Silurian era, one can say the giant shark of its time. Back then, the fish, as a species, still were not prevalent in the marine environment, and dinosaurs appeared about 200 million years later. Nevertheless, there were plenty of hunters of trilobites. And here's another predator that hunted trilobites. This is the sea scorpion. After splitting the rock, we detected the prints of this creature on 2 parts. By the way, these were the first mammals that were able to get out of the sea onto land. They were residents of lagoons and felt equally comfortable both in the water and in the land environment. Not only are the remains of inhabitants of prehistoric sea depths added to this collection, real treasures can be found in the interior of the Podillyan Tovtry, for example, semi-precious onyx. It's not different from the precious chalcedony. After the sea receded, the destroyed shells of the shellfish were deposited in cracks and voids. They ended up a sort of calcite formation with a poetic name, marble onyx. Near the crystals you can find the so-called Mary's glass. It is thinly laminated, almost transparent gypsum. In short, it is a very rare formation. Obviously, the best conditions for Podillyan gems have been created in the so-called crystal cave. It got such a name because of the shining crystals. But how did such karst cavities, caves and gypsum rocks appear? We need to start from where the gypsum came from. Gypsum appeared in the early Tortonian Sea, some 16 to 17 million years ago. When the water receded, lagoons like Sivash in the Sea of Azov were formed. In them, because of the excess of salts, the gypsum mixed with clay began to be deposited. There was such a stone as gypsum anhydrite. Later, when the territory rose and the sea receded, the groundwater gradually began to corrode it, and since this substance is a sulfide, it is very easily dissolved with water. Thus, as a rule, voids appeared along with tectonic cracks, thus creating complex labyrinths. The path along the labyrinths of the crystal cave is not that long, about 23 kilometers. The knowledge of the mysterious and the unknown will be revealed to those who venture on a journey through the underground labyrinths created by nature itself. The Crystal Cave, thanks to its accessibility, is the most visited cave of Podillia. The sizes of its corridors and halls allow visitors to pass freely. Plus, there is secondary crystallization. This substance here was dissolved and transformed into such pure gypsum crystals. The crystals sat on the walls and on the ceiling of voids and gypsum rocks, creating a unique color in the cave. Among the 100 caves of Podillia, the Crystal Cave has the highest degree of crystallization. Despite its huge popularity among tourists, the main decoration of the cave, the crystals, remain intact. Constant humidity and a temperature of almost 11 degrees Celsius, and in addition high ceilings, not available for those wishing to profit from sparkling treasure, preserve the pristine appearance of the Crystal Cave. Escaping from the realm of eternal darkness to the surface, we continue our journey through the Podillyan Tovtry. It seems that this coral chain is endless. Nihyn Tovtry changes into Verbka Tovtry, similar in content and so different in form. They take turns to rise in the form of an elongated levee, then in the form of separate cone-shaped hills, and sometimes they take the form of sea atoll. The ridge near the village of Verbka, in contrast to all the side reefs, is the smallest one. There are only 4 distinct eminences of a regular conical shape. Why is this territory so important? There are practically no forest and shrub massifs, but the herbaceous vegetation is represented by the biodiversity of all kinds of species that exist within the park, as well as a large number of endangered plants on the red list. There are conditions for their preservation here. They are practically not threatened. Cattle do not graze here. There is no agricultural influence, and besides that, proper protection of these plants is provided. These places were twice subjected to glaciation, but the peaks of the Tovtry were not covered by the ice shell. The Tovtry Ridge, like Noah's Ark, saved many plants that managed to adapt to the cold. On these peaks, there are a huge number of rare relict plants, most of which are medicinal. It is interesting that on the slopes of the Tovtry, even the oasis of the steppe was preserved. 4 Tovtry, similar to each other, lined up like sworn brothers. For this, the people call them 4 chevaliers. They, like sentinels, stand guard over the peace and quiet of the local inhabitants. They say that it was part of the design. The approaching danger was announced by sentries who were kindling bonfires on the peaks of the Tovtry. Noticing the signal, the local residents left for the forests, escaping from the ruthless Tatars. It is impossible to miss an incredibly high chalk block while moving from Khmelnytskyi closer to the Dniester River. The last geological period of the Mesozoic era is represented most widely in this place. The thickness of the Cretaceous bed within the boundaries of Bakota is the largest in the region. The height of this layer is about 30 meters. The lower part is the lower Cretaceous. The upper part of the layer above this white horizon is the beginning of the upper Cretaceous. If there is a desire to find the remains of a dinosaur, then the best place to look for them is within Podillyan, thanks to the large concentration of deposits. In this place, an amazingly beautiful view opens from the peak of the White Mountain. This landscape is not solely a natural creation. For some time now, to be exact from the middle of the 1980s, humans also had a hand in its creation. For the Dniester hydroelectric power station to function, the Dniester River was forced to burst its banks, flooding the valley. Humans raised the water level by about 40 meters. The shores of the ancient Tigris have significantly spread in width, thus a huge artificial aquarium with a total volume of 3 square kilometers has gradually taken shape on a full-blooded life of its own. To my left is the place that was created as a result of construction of the Dniester hydroelectric power station in the 1970s to 1980s. But this is also my story, because I was born in these places and lived the first 27 years of my life here. Construction lasted for 8 years until 1981. People were certainly worried. And it was planned to move around, cut down trees, destroy houses, and move the cemetery. Since 1981, when the first section of the HPS was launched, the flooding occurred, basically before my very eyes and the eyes of all those people who lived earlier in the valley. The villages were submerged into the depths of the water, but their history has remained. New pages are opened every day. Leafing through them, scientists managed to establish that one of the flooded villages was the center of the local region at the beginning of the 15th century. It occupied a territory comparable to the third of present-day Kyiv, but Bakota's story began much earlier. Around 2000 years BC, this place was settled by people. As a confirmation, the imprint of a human foot on the stone was found here. There are also a lot of sacrificial pits and stone statues here. It is clear that this was the pre-Christian era, and it was only in the 11th century, as evidenced by the rock inscription, that the first traces of Christians were found here. They came to pray in the local caves that were ready for human use. There is a legend, partially scientifically confirmed, that the footprint on the stone found in the rock monastery belonged to Buddha. Currently, this artifact lies at the bottom of the Smotrich River. Maybe that's why there is a mystical spirit in these caves that does not belong to a single religion. In the cells are images of different religions, but the monastery does not belong to a single one of them. All those who come here for prayer, for help and for healing are received on an equal footing by these walls. Every year, at least 2,000 parishioners gather here on Savior of the Honey Feast Day. Pilgrims come not only from the nearest villages and cities, there are also many guests from distant countries. For many who have visited this place, Bakota has become an unforgettable discovery, a man-made miracle among the natural attractions of Ukraine, and a place where you definitely will want to visit a second time.